Today we're talking with Mike Potts, CEO of Lancope, and Larry Ponemon, founder of the Ponemon Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Yeah,
good
morning.
to be here with you, Richard.
It's great to have you guys back, especially you, Mike. Give us a refresher on Lancope and some of the highlights of the last year.
Well, briefly, Richard, my name is Mike Potts, and I'm the president and CEO of Lancope. We're a network security company. We focus on providing operational visibility and security intelligence by, in essence, converting the network into an online sensing grid. Our vogue of security is very much in vogue right now. We had record growth last year. We grew over 67% in booking, 60% in GAAP. It's our fourth year of profitability and cash flow positive generation. And we're on a great roll with some of the things that we're going to talk about here with Dr. Larry Ponemon of the Ponemon Institute that helped us jointly conduct some pretty remarkable research. We feel we're at the right place at the right time based on these findings.
Larry, tell us something about the survey that you ran and
Sure.
what you found.
Well, first, a little bit about our company. Ponemon Institute is linearly focused on just three things: privacy, data protection, and information security. We're a boring organization because we're very narrowly focused, but we're very deep. And this is one of the areas that we're very interested in studying. You know, how do organizations manage the incident response process? What are the issues that they face? What are the barriers to successful incident response? And what's the state? You know, are things getting better, worse? Are the bad guys winning this battle? So we really were very interested in working with Lancope on implementing this study.
I can imagine what some of the answers to those questions are. Tell us how you conducted the study.
Well, we used a survey methodology, and our final sample is 674 people who are qualified to respond to the survey. These are people in either IT security, fully dedicated, or partially dedicated to IT security. As you probably know, I think we were just talking before how hard it is to create a good-sized sample. So we were very, very fortunate to get this kind of response. I think that it's a signal that the respondent thought this was really interesting research.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, tell us about some of the things you drew out of the survey.
Well, to Larry's comments of the bad guys winning, it's pretty amazing. One of the most revealing stats that we saw was that 57% of the companies surveyed felt they were going to suffer a material breach within the next 12 months, 47% of them within the next 6 months. So in this cat and mouse security game, the mouse is starting to kick the cat's tail. He's getting bigger, faster, and smarter, and much more evasive. And you could almost feel the tension in this data. We actually went back on a couple different instances to clarify it, just to make sure we were understanding it correctly. And some of the most amazing stuff that came out of it is, despite all of the headlines that we're seeing on CNBC and Squawk Box and in the Journal, is that 80% of the CEOs are left out in the dark. They don't know until after the fact. Which was remarkable until what happened over the holidays with Target. The CEO of Target was informed several days after his people already knew by the Secret Service and not by his own people. Just remarkable information and really crying out for a different lean forward security model.
And certainly the similar types of attacks during the holiday season in South Korea demonstrated the difference between U.S. and South Korea, where all of the CEOs of all the companies resigned en masse because they felt that they were derelict in their duty, which is a little different.
It's culturally different.
Very
you don't see
different.
a lot of CEOs resigning. Maybe they should, but the key variable is that in places like South Korea, you lose face. You start to lose confidence with your stakeholders when you can't secure your organization. And we see that in other countries in Asia, particularly, but also parts of Europe.
I'm getting anecdotal evidence that people are using cash at Target. They no longer trust Target with their credit cards because they don't want the hassle. You know, it's no loss to them usually, but that's pretty bad loss of face for a
Think
company.
about the reputation impact to a company as large as Target. And when people start using cash, you're losing business, right? People, not everyone goes to the ATM machine and has cash in their pocket.
And you're losing the data.
And you're losing a lot of data. Yeah.
But it's not just Target, to be fair, too. I mean, Neiman Marcus and Michaels, and there have been a number of other compromises here announced since that point. But the interesting thing, digging further into this data, was that there's an outcry for investment in incident response. Only a third of companies have actually invested in incident response capabilities, and the majority of them, 70 to 80%, feel that's the best thing that they can do is to try to get ahead of a curve, because it's no longer if you're going to get compromised, it's when and how prepared you are. And that's what this other data began to surface. And some of the remarkable things that came out of it to play into our hand with what we're doing in terms of what's the best thing that these companies can do. And that is actually collecting some of the metadata off of switches and routers known as net flow or packet capture information to forensically understand what's happening, to basically defend and resolve these threats, and then also to get better from a prediction of what's going to happen in the future.
Do they in the survey, did they actually talk about spending more, or were they still kind of, we don't know what to do?
Well, I think we had a couple of questions suggesting that spending is going to increase, but probably not enough. It's still such a small percentage to the total IT security budget. It was surprising. And I think what Mike said, I just want to echo the point, it's all about being ahead, even one or two steps ahead of the bad guy. And that's why you need to have network visibility. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what's an anomaly. You need to learn from mistakes. Having that advanced information, and we call it security intelligence, is really, really critical.
There's an old Gartner, or I should say an old Drucker and Deming adage. I think Gartner may have used it too, and that is that unless you can measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
Well, in security, if you can't see it, you can't secure it. So what Larry is talking about relative to network visibility, that's what these companies are really asking for, and they're clamoring. I mean, I work with our 700 customers, and as they convert, become active customers, I just watched them go through the challenge and the frustration of moving into a new world until they got the comfort of visibility and to be able to see what's actually happening on the network, and applying some of the things that we do with our behavior anomalies to try to detect behavior once it begins to change, whether somebody's exfiltrating information on the network or a POS device is infused by a piece of malware that starts exfiltrating credit card information. Once they can begin to see it, they can identify who, what, when, where, and how on the network, and the blood pressure almost drops with the folks that are using products like ours and process and technology to solve these problems.
This survey is extremely timely. I mean, we're only a couple days into RSA conference, and yet I'm picking up out of 20, 30 conversations, half of them have been about incident response and reducing that time to resolution, as they call it. What's Lancope doing on the, we've discovered it, we can figure out what happened. What's Lancope doing to integrate with the solutions that, fix it, I guess?
It's a great question. We have a number of strategic partnerships, one of which is with Cisco, and trying to provide more context to actually understand what's actually happening, and then mitigation relationships, working with these endpoint providers to shut down a zone on the network or to hand off the message relative to what needs to be done to resurface or reface a laptop if it was infected by a bot per se.
Larry, this is a new survey, right? So what do you expect to see if you were to redo the survey every 12 months?
It's what I hope to see versus what I expect to see. I hope to see things get a little bit better. And one of the indicators, leading indicators, is funding. You want to see organizations spending enough resources to in fact get the job done. Also, you want to see more organizations using available network intelligence technologies. I don't think you could solve this problem because the bad guy is so smart and so stealthy. It's not like the olden days where you have intrusion prevention or intrusion detection system and a good firewall and you're in business. You really need to understand your net flow. So I'd hope to see improvement in that space as well.
Was there any indication from the respondents that they didn't have the people resources to do some of this?
Yeah, technology is essential. There's no question about it, but also good people is essential. And we found a lot of the folks who were dedicated or involved in incident response were not fully dedicated. It was a part-time job, and sometimes a very small part of their full-time job. So we want to see more dedicated experts, people with that forensic capability who won't understand how to use these tools that Mike was talking about.
Mike, over time with your customer base, how have you seen their employee workforces get up to speed on using your tools and being able to quickly get advantage from them?
The companies I can talk about pretty easily that are large users of our technology, companies like Cisco and HP, I've watched them, despite all the technology that they have, how they have actually implemented us as a part of their solution, integrated with SourceFire as an example, or Tipping Point in the case of HP, really to take a a very defined process in how they go about implementing a technology like ours with the people, process, and technology. And I think across the board, companies realize that we're shifting into a security 2.0 phase. 1.0 relative to perimeter-based securities, firewalls, AVs, and the like, still a proper first defense, but that's not going to solve today's security problems from an incident response point of view. And that's why you're seeing a whole lot more attention to this relative to what's happened in the study and what's happening on the show floor here at RSA today.
What can, for either of you, what can CEOs do, today after watching this interview to, quickly get up to speed on at least understanding where they need to be?
Richard, this presents an interesting opportunity for the CEOs and the C-suite in general, because it generally comes down to a people, process, and technology opportunity. People in the sense that it's a chance to grease the skids and enable bad news to move faster. Bad news by virtue doesn't move that fast, good news does. But it's also a way for the IT and the security community to try to break this down into some more digestible chunks that the C-suite can understand what's working and what's not, to be more forthright. And then from a process point of view, as the survey data suggests, CEOs love metrics, and that's really what this data is screaming out for relative to trying to understand the mean time to identify an attack, the mean time to understand it or to know, and then the mean time to resolution. And then finally, it really does come down to a technology point of view to embody the people and the process aspect of it. Whether you implement a product like StealthWatch from an incident response point of view on another product, this is really what this technology is crying out for or in this study.
So I like to think of a CEO as also the CISO, the super CISO. Ultimately, they're responsible for the system security. And we want the CEOs to be smarter about security issues. And metrics can be very helpful. Give the CEO the right metrics. For example, the time to know and understanding root causes, time to identify, time to fix. Those kinds of metrics, I think, would be very helpful for CEOs, not just CISOs and CIOs, to understand and use as part of their alignment, overall business strategy alignment.
Yeah, I saw Tom Ridge speak just last night, and using his lawyer background, and of course he's talking to a bunch of PwC auditors, but he was predicting that there will be lawsuits based on best practices,
Sure.
and not even though there aren't any regulations yet for some of these breaches that are happening. But we're going to start seeing activist stockholders and potentially customers engaging in lawsuits to really drive this point home.
It's already starting. That we see some of that already. Yeah.
So that'll get the attention of the C-suite. Mike, what was your biggest surprise and key takeaways from these survey results?
Well, Richard, the biggest surprise was that 80% of the CEOs were left out in the dark, as we started the discussion earlier. And then the fact of the matter is that I understood coming into this that many companies felt that they were under siege, but I didn't realize that over 50% of the companies that were exemplified in this survey felt that they were going to suffer a material breach within the next 12 months. So that was probably the biggest surprise. But the key takeaways, and some of the things that Larry pointed out here, is that there's an outcry from a lean forward security point of view and incident response. We're living in an ever-changing world with cybercrime further accelerating. The lean forward security model is required because the perimeter model in 1.0 is not solving today's problems. We need to augment the perimeter with a lean forward security model to really try to get ahead of cybercrime, not only to stop the threats that are now underway in attacking corporate networks, but it's also the future threats by learning from those on how to better safeguard your network. That was probably the key takeaway, which very pleased in research and that we've refined it with Larry to really get the granularity that came out of it.
So Mike, what's the future? If we're trying to handle incident response, through learning forensics, understand what happened, prevent it from happening in the future, stop it while it's in action. Where will we be when we're talking next year?
We're going to be in a much more predictive mode, trying to protect and defend and mitigate and then learn from what just happened to predict what's going to happen next. And I thought we would get there a little bit faster, but that is going to be the trend that we see in more predictive analytics. And one of the things that we need to realize is that this isn't going to stop. From an adversarial point of view, there are always going to be bad guys trying to break into networks. But what you want to do is you want to make it difficult not only to get in, but to get out. The difference between a good bank robber and a great bank robber, for example, is a good bank robber can get onto the network. A great bank robber can get onto the network and get out of the network undetected. And what we want to do is shut those guys down. We want to shut the grid down relative to, if there is a point of entry, which inevitably there will be, to make it very difficult for them to get out. And therefore, the predictive analytics, when you see A, B, and C occur, D is likely to happen, and shut that zone on the network down.
Larry, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think Mike is absolutely right. It's all about predictive tools and systems that get you to understand the bad guy and to get them to D and then stop them and kill them. Not literally kill them, but basically stop them from harming
Many people would like to
Yeah,
do
maybe
that, but
maybe some people will. But I think that's the key. The key is to stay at least 1 or 2 steps ahead of the bad guy. And as I mentioned before, the bad guys are getting smarter. They're more sophisticated. They operate in more stealth. And we're constantly compromised. So it's, again, in that environment, to be smart about your environment and have all these tools that give you that visibility becomes essential.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Ponemon.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Richard.